unity has been used a lot by President Biden since his inaugural address, but his opponents say his willingness to pass a COVID relief plan, for example, without bipartisan support shows that he is doing the opposite. Do you believe that to be the case? Greg, I'll start with you.
No, absolutely not. And I think what you're seeing President Biden do is pursuing an agenda that has broad support across the American landscape, whether it's COVID relief, an economic stimulus, rebuilding our nation's roads and bridges, tackling climate change. These are all issues that poll very, very high, even among many Republicans. Even in Texas last week, for example, it's very interesting. When we had that horrible storm and people were suffering, the president didn't talk about red states and it being Texas's fault, as we might have heard from the prior administration. He sent aid. He declared a national emergency. We're not waking up anymore to kind of hateful tweets that we used to. So I think you're seeing a much more unified approach from this president. And if Republicans choose to represent their constituents and do things their constituents want, I think you'll see them voting for many of President Biden's agenda.
Nate, what do you think?
No, I mean, President Biden has pursued the most objectively left-wing agenda of any president in modern U.S. history in his first month. His sheer number of executive orders alone made the New York Times editorial board, which is not known for being a hardline conservative organization, write an op-ed criticizing him for being too radical and too ambitious in his use of the phone and the pen. So I think, look, you know, President Biden is a Democrat. He doesn't owe Republicans anything. He is allowed to govern as a Democrat. He ran as a certain kind of progressive. But the heart of his campaign was about unity, was about bipartisanship, was about moderation, was about reaching across the aisle. And he's made it clear that that really wasn't true, that what he was selling voters was a lie. And I think for those of us who are concerned that this is how his administration was going to work out, this is sort of a confirmation of our worst fears. And it's disappointing because it means the divisions in our country certainly aren't going away anytime soon.
Nate, do you think, you know, because in recent years, of course, things have become bitterly divided, right? Hyper-partisan. Do you think it's even possible? And this is for both sides as far as Republicans and Democrats. Do you think there could be a meeting in the middle, and have Republicans done enough to do that with President Biden?
Well, whether or not Republicans are, you know, in the Senate and the House are prepared to, I think, is certainly an open question. There's an argument that they just aren't interested in working with Biden. I think that's totally fair. If the country is prepared to unify, I think there are certain sort of 80-20 issues like infrastructure that Greg talked about that could be something that the Biden administration prioritized. Unfortunately, they've waded right into the most divisive culture war issues. You know, we're talking about taxpayer-funded abortion on demand. We're talking about prioritizing coronavirus relief by race and gender. These are not 80-20 issues. These are incredibly divisive issues that play to the most radical fringes of the Democratic base. So if the Biden administration was interested in prioritizing those issues, I think it could unify the country, but it isn't.
Now, you mentioned infrastructure, which is a bipartisan issue. Officials in Texas came out with a pretty stunning statement saying the state's power grid was, quote, seconds and minutes away from a catastrophic failure that would have left Texans in the dark for months. We do know that Texas's situation is a bit unique, but infrastructure has long been an issue around the country. Is this an issue that perhaps Biden should take up, considering both sides agree that it is an urgent one that needs to be fixed? Greg, I'll start with you.
Yes, and I think you'll see that next. As soon as the Congress passes and sends to the president COVID relief, the next item on the agenda is economic stimulus. And the center of that economic stimulus bill will be rebuilding our roads and bridges, transit systems, the electric grid, water source, send broadband out to rural America. So, yes, I think that'll be the next priority item. And once again, the Republicans will be faced with a choice. They can work with the president on an issue that has broad public support, much like COVID relief, or they can decide not to work with him. And to Nate's point, there are going to be many Republicans that whatever Biden puts down, they will choose not to work with him. Remember, most of the Republican base views President Biden as an illegitimate president. The election was stolen is still something that most Republicans believe. So that doesn't leave a lot of room left for President Biden to work with them. I think he's going to pursue what he perceives to be a unifying agenda. I think he's going to have broad support among the public. And I just want to push back on the notion that for support from Republicans in Washington is the prerequisite for putting forward what would be considered to be a unifying agenda. You might have to do that without it.
Nate, really quickly, 20 seconds because they're wrapping me here, but I want to give you a chance to respond.
Well, I don't think anyone's arguing that support from Republicans in D.C. is the prerequisite, but support from the American people could be a good starting point. And Biden choosing the most divisive culture war issues, which certainly don't have broad support with the American people, is not the way to unify the country. And that's what he promised on his campaign. And it seems like that's not what he meant.
Okay. Greg Rothschild and Nate Hochman, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Appreciate it.